straight face and says, Mom, the kid's above the kitchen. They live in that room above the kitchen. And she just gets chills.
So, once again, you found yourself at the campsite of the Orator. Well, please pull up a chair. As you can see, my fire is stoked, which means tonight I have another tale to tell. But before we begin, if you do find yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then please like this video, but also subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell. When you click the bell, it notifies you every time I upload new content, and when you subscribe to my channel, it does help me to continue to do what I love, which is telling terrifying tales. Second, all of my stories are first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So, if you or anybody you know has a story that might fit with my channel, then please either reach out in the comments below or on any of my social media. We will find a time to get together, collect your story, and one day hopefully feature it here on The Orator. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's story. It is a tale that I call In the Fields of Death. So our story kind of acts as a flashback today. It sort of starts a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, when Gary is 32 years old and he's about to get married. And right before the wedding, a couple days before the wedding, his mom pulls him aside and sort of sits him down and says, I have to tell you about this. It's a story I've had for a long time and I've wanted to tell you, and I don't know if you remember it, but it's just something I really need to get off of my chest. And Gary was kind of like taken aback by his mom's demeanor, because it was very clear that whatever she was going to tell him, she was really scared about. He remembers that she was kind of pale, and she's normally very loud and boisterous and excited, and she was sort of quiet and reserved, almost whispering. And she sits him down and tells this story. And by the end of it, she's literally like shaking, white as a sheet, and truly terrified. And he remembers, his mom, she grew up extremely religious, and she didn't really believe in anything supernatural as far as like ghosts and things like that roaming the earth. She thought, she was kind of a fundamental Christian. She thought when you passed away, your spirit went to heaven, and that was the end of it. And so as she's telling the story, he's trying to keep in mind the fact that she doesn't even believe in the things that she's telling him, and she's still terrified of it. So the flashback happens, and now we're back in 1988. Gary is about 2 years old, and his brother Victor is born. And it's, Gary, now baby Victor, and his mom and dad. And his dad works, and his mom stays at home, and they live in this tiny little, 2-bedroom apartment kind of flat in southern Ohio, and it's really cramped, really tight space. And they're thinking about, even though their budget is tight because only dad works and mom stays at home, they're thinking about moving. And so they're searching at all these houses, and it's, of course, out of their price range. And eventually, they find this house in southern Ohio, and it's about an hour from town. It's out in the middle of nowhere in kind of the woods, and there's some fields and stuff like that, and it's one of these old farmhouses. And it's in quite a bit of disrepair, and it definitely needs to be renovated. But it's still, livable. And so they're thinking, we can get this place for really cheap. One, because it's kind of messed up. But two, there was a wood-burning stove in the kitchen, and it had actually caught the wall behind it on fire and done a ton of fire damage on that wall, and it hadn't yet been repaired. And, in modern times, obviously, you probably wouldn't even be able to rent that house because of the damage and inspections and stuff like that. But this is the 80s. Things are a little bit more relaxed. And so the owner says, I can rent it to you. I will do it at a reduced price because of the damage. And he still has an inspector come out and kind of make sure that the property is still structurally sound and stuff like that. It's not gonna be a damaging problem for them. And so, his parents, Gary's parents, they check it out, and they're like, this is a pretty beat up old house, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's definitely bigger. It's 2 stories. It's got 3 bedrooms. It's got 2 bathrooms. And it's within our very limited price range. And so despite the fact that it was going to be a lot of work repairing it, they kind of thought, this is the best deal that we're going to get. And so they decide to move there. Now, when they first moved there, you have the house, and it's 2 stories, and it sits on 7 acres, and most of that land is, kind of open fields and stuff like that. There's a duck pond right on the property, and then sort of around it is woods, and about 2 miles away is their closest neighbor, and he lives literally across the road. So you have to kind of go all the way through this trail that sort of serves as their driveway. It takes you about 1.5 miles to the road. And then on the other side of that road is their neighbor. And so they remember, one of the first things that Gary's mom remembers is when they were pulling up to the house for the first time that Gary had been there. He starts freaking out. Now, Gary at this point, he's like 2.5, almost 3 years old. He's walking. He is talking quite a bit for his age. He's pretty advanced in the speech area. And right away, he starts freaking out. As soon as they pull up to this house, he starts yelling at his mom. He says, "Mom, it's a scary house. It's a bad house. I don't like this house. We got to go. Mama, bye. We got to go bye." And she's like, this is really weird. And for the first couple of weeks that they were there, Gary would constantly say this stuff. He would just be very nervous of the house, very skittish, very scared. And, she obviously kept a close eye on her son, but there didn't seem to be anything wrong with the house. And after a little while, he kind of stopped that talk. And so she just thought maybe it was just the stress of a move and the fact that everything was new. And obviously he has his new younger baby brother. And there was just a lot of change all at once. And so mom kind of attributed it to that. Now, the other thing that's a little bit weird about this house, so the kitchen where the fire damage happened is all the way at the back of the house. And that's where the stairs that lead upstairs go. And as soon as you go upstairs, you hit this landing on the second floor. And there was a door right there that was locked. And the owner of the house, when he rented it to them, he said, "Listen, that fire damage that had destroyed that back wall, it actually really did a number on that room. So I'm just going to leave that room locked, leave it alone, and, eventually, hopefully we'll repair it. But for now, it's just kind of off limits." But what was weird was when the inspector kind of went through the house and sort of assessed the damage, he told Gary's mom and dad, "I'm looking at this fire and, based off of how much damage it did in the kitchen, the wall and stuff like that, there's just no way it reached that second room and did damage to it." And so even though Gary's parents were kind of weirded out by this because it was an out and out lie from their landlord, there was sort of a creepy vibe about that room and nobody really wanted to go in it anyway. And so they just said, you know what, for whatever reason, he wants to keep that door locked. It's really none of our business. And so let's just leave it be. And so a couple of months go by and everything is kind of great. Gary's dad is working a lot and he's gone a lot because he has to travel so much more for work now because they're kind of about an hour away from civilization. But they can afford the place and Gary's mom stays at home and takes care of the kids. And things are kind of as good as they've been in a really long time. Until one day, Gary's mom is outside and she's sort of folding laundry and it's a beautiful summer day outside and she has the baby monitor on and Victor, younger baby brother Victor, he's asleep in his crib and so she's kind of got the baby monitor and she's listening for him and Gary is outside with their dog Boss. Now Boss is pretty big dog. He's like a Labrador pit bull mix and so he's one of these big girthy kind of guard dogs. But he's super sweet, and him and Gary are kind of rolling around in the grass, just sort of having fun. And, Mom is right there hanging up laundry and everything like that. And she's hanging up, and she's sort of listening to the baby monitor, kind of humming and going through the chores. And then all of a sudden, it sort of dawns on her that it's completely quiet out. And a minute ago, she could hear the dog, Boss, and Gary rolling around and playing and laughing and barking and all that. And now there's none of that, and it's completely silent. And so she sort of puts the basket of laundry down and she's going and she's kind of looking around and she doesn't see her son or the dog. And then all of a sudden she hears Boss, the dog, start barking. And it's not like just barking. It's like a panicked, something is wrong kind of a barking. And she turns and looks and he's sort of halfway between the duck pond and her. Now the duck pond is about 500 yards away. So quite a bit of distance between where she was in this pond. And Boss is now between the two of them. And he's sort of running back and forth. He's sort of running up to her, barking, and then running towards that pond. And so, Gary's mom, she kind of realizes he's trying to signal me for something. I need to follow him. So she follows Boss, and he takes her all the way to this pond. And as she's getting close to this pond, she notices way out in the middle of this pond, there's this big thrashing around going on. And all of a sudden, she freaks out. She goes into complete panic mode. She starts booking it towards the pond. And now Boss knows that he has her attention, and she knows what's going on. So he runs into the pond, and there's Gary, way out in the middle of the pond, way over his head. He can't even swim yet, and yet somehow he's made it all the way 500 yards away from where he was just a minute ago, all the way out to the middle of this pond. And Boss, he runs, he dives right into the pond, he swims all the way out to Gary, he bites down on his collar, and he slowly pulls him back out of the pond and onto dry land. And of course, Gary's mom, she's right there, and she's checking him, and he seems totally fine. He didn't swallow too much water, he's not unconscious or anything crazy like that. He's obviously riled up because he was just in the middle of the water, flailing for his life. But after she checks him, she's like, how could this have possibly happened? He was just with me, like within arm's reach a minute ago. How did he travel 500 yards? And then how did he get in the middle of this pond? All of this while I'm kind of half paying attention. She's like, I wasn't like eyes on him, but I was there paying attention to my son. And so she's freaked out by this, and she realizes I need to do a better job. And so I'm going to baby proof this house. This is never going to happen again. And so she buys a bunch of baby gates and play areas that she can fence him off in and all kinds of stuff like that to make sure that there's just no way that ever happens again. And, obviously, if you're a parent, one of the worst things you can imagine is something like that happening to your baby, them going out in the water and not being able to swim. And so she is extremely scared of whatever happened. And so she just says, that's never going to happen again. And for a couple months, everything was great. They went back to normal life. Everybody's sort of enjoying the house and the space and everything like that. Gary has adjusted to everything. No more weird outbursts. No more traveling distances that he couldn't have traveled. And nothing like that has happened. And then one day, a couple months after, the pond incident, Gary's mom is cooking in the kitchen. And Gary is upstairs, and she has him fenced in his bedroom. So he's kind of got a gated area that he's staying in. And then at the threshold of his door, there's a baby gate. And then at the threshold of the stairs is another baby gate. And then downstairs at the threshold of the kitchen is another one. Like I said, she kind of went crazy with this stuff. So there's a lot more than is probably necessary. She has Victor asleep in his crib. She's got the baby monitor there for that. And every 15 minutes or so, she pops up and checks in on him. And she's a little bit extra paranoid because of the pond incident. And so she's like really checking in on them. And husband's at work. He's on his way home soon. Boss is outside kind of hanging out playing. And she's downstairs cooking. And everything is going great. When all of a sudden, outside, she starts hearing Boss bark in kind of a panicked way again. And she's like, there's no way. And so she, opens the baby gate, runs upstairs, opens the second baby gate, runs in, checks on Victor. He's still asleep in his bed. Everything's totally cool there. And then she runs over to Gary's room and checks, and he's not there. His gated area, still gated, still locked, right? He can't possibly have gotten out of there. The baby gate, the one to his room, still closed, still latched. The one to the kitchen, the downstairs into the kitchen, locked, latched. The one that enters the kitchen, locked, latch, and obviously she's there in the kitchen. And so for him to have gotten out, he would have had to somehow climb over all of these baby gates or open them and then close them, which obviously he's two, he can't do any of that, and get by her in the kitchen. And so she's like, there's no way he's outside. And she does a quick, thorough search of the house first because she's like, he has to be here somewhere, and he's not. And she keeps, in the background, she keeps hearing Boss barking and barking, and then all of a sudden it hits her. The last time he did this was because of what had happened to Gary. And so she runs outside, and sure enough, Boss, he's running in circles, and she's like, what's going on? Where is he? And he starts taking off. Now, he doesn't head in the direction of the pond. He actually heads down the driveway in kind of the opposite direction. And so she, grabs the baby monitor so she can still hear for Victor, but she has got to find her son, Gary. And so she starts hauling it down the driveway after Boss. And basically, Boss is doing the same thing he did before. He'd run a little bit, and then he'd sort of turn around and circle back and, kind of make sure she's still following him. And all the way down the driveway they go. And like I said, this is like not a normal driveway. This is sort of a trail that leads back to their house. And he takes her all the way to the road, which is like 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. And, part of her is thinking, this is not possible, right? Clearly my son can't have gotten this far. I just checked in on him 15 minutes ago, and also he couldn't have gotten here. And the other part of her is thinking, well, where else could he possibly be? And so she, continues to follow Boss. He takes her across the road into their neighbor's property. She follows him across into the neighbor's property, and then he takes her off of all the trails and kind of into the thick woods. And she is so panicked that she's not even thinking straight. She's just following the dog and praying to God that he is going to take her to the right place. And so she's crashing through the woods, and it's thick, right? And so she's getting all scratched up by the branches. They're cutting her face, and she doesn't care. She's just smashing through it. And eventually she sort of breaks through into this area that is clearly a dumping ground of some kind. There's tires everywhere. Abandoned vehicles are out here. Just trash and cans and old pieces of giant tin. And just one of these places where clearly this is where her neighbor just dumps all of his junk in the middle of nowhere. And so she's, kind of looking around, trying to figure out, is Gary out here somehow? Even though, she's gone 1.5 miles down the road, and now she's way into the middle of these woods. And so she's kind of flipping stuff over and looking under stuff and checking in stuff. And then she flips open this giant piece of tin, and this wave of just decay comes over her. And she looks down, and there's the carcass of a dead cow. Now, what had happened was their neighbor, he was a farmer. And in order to get rid of his cows, instead of disposing of them properly, he literally just dragged their corpses out here in the middle of the woods and just dump them. So you didn't have to deal with the tax side of things of getting rid of animals, none of the legality. He just literally, this was his dumping ground for those. And so she's like, all of a sudden, the smell of death just permeated the whole place. And she went from panic to something else entirely. There was just something about this place that was just a terrifying place of death and decay and just totally disgusting. And so she's screaming out for Gary, and she's ripping through all the stuff, and she's going deeper into the woods, and Boss is trying to pull her along. And as she's getting deeper and deeper into the woods, her neighbor, he just stopped disguising what was going on, and they weren't hidden anymore. They were just dead cow carcasses everywhere. Everywhere she looked, she could see bone, and there were still pieces of rotting flesh, and there were flies everywhere, and the stench was just overwhelming. And there in the middle of this field of all of this death and decay is Gary. And he's just standing there kind of looking around very confused. He's not frightened, but it's like very clear that he did not, it's like he just woke up and was here, and he doesn't know what's going on. And so she runs to him, and he kind of runs to her, and they embrace, and, she's freaking out, but she doesn't want to freak out too much because she doesn't want to scare her son. But she's thinking, how the hell could this have possibly happened? How could he have gotten out of his, gated area, over the 3 baby gates, past me in the kitchen, 1.5 miles down the road, and then all the way through all of these woods in, 10, 15 minutes, maybe? And somehow Boss is outside, and he didn't stop it or anything like that. The whole thing is just impossible. She's thinking, whatever happened with the pond, even though I don't think I could conceive how he could have gotten there, that was at least only 500 yards. She's like, this is miles. This makes literally no sense. And so naturally, she starts to question Gary. And obviously, like I said, he's advanced in his language, but he's still only 2.5, 3 years old. But she starts to ask him, how did you get out here? What happened? And he says, the kids took me out here. And she's thinking, what kids? Kids came past me in the kitchen and got you and took you, and I didn't notice any of this? She's like, what kids? What are you talking about? And Gary, he's totally serious, straight face. He says, Mom, the kids above the kitchen. They live in that room above the kitchen. And she just gets chills. And so she starts questioning, what do they look like? How many of them were there? Where did you meet them? But no matter what she asks, he just stops talking about it. He just looks at her and he's completely quiet. He won't answer any more questions about these kids. And so at some point she just realizes, I got to get back to Victor and the food on the stove and all of that. And so she scoops him up and they run all the way back home. And thankfully everything's okay. Victor is still asleep. Nothing happened with the food on the stove. Everything is okay in the house. But now that room upstairs obviously has a totally different, more ominous feeling and meaning than anything that they had expected before. And so Gary's mom, she finishes dinner and she has them both, Victor and Gary, in her sight the whole time. Eventually her husband gets home, and over dinner, she kind of tells him what had happened, the impossibility of it, how terrified she was, how, he traversed such a far distance. And she's telling him all this, and she says, I don't care that this is a great deal. I don't care that this seems like it was an answer to our prayers. We can't live here anymore. We've got to find anywhere else to live but here. Something weird is going on, and I'm really scared that something bad's going to happen to one of our kids if we don't leave. And luckily, he took her seriously, and within a couple weeks, they had found a new place to live. The entire time between when they had decided to move and when they actually moved, Gary's mom would frequently try to bring it up to him. They'd just be having normal conversation about stuff, and then she would suddenly bring up the children and say, hey, you remember when you kind of went out in the woods and you said the children took you out there? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And every single time she tried to bring it up, he would just do the exact same thing. He'd go totally silent. He would stare at her in a very serious manner, and he just wouldn't say anything else. Until eventually, they moved, and she had to let it go, and he just completely forgot about it. And then 30 years later, before he got married, she said, I have to unburden this. I have to get this off my chest. This is what happened. I have no explanation for it. We never went in that room and checked it out. But luckily, we got us and the whole family. We moved away, and we never experienced anything like that ever again. And so that's going to do it for today's tale. If you found yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand account of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then remember to like my video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell. Second, all of my videos are first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story that might fit well with my channel, please reach out in the comments below or on any of my social media. We will get together, collect your story, and one day hopefully feature it here on the Orator. And so that's going to do it. Until next time, please pull up your chair. My fire will be stoked. And I will have another tale to tell.